tax arrangements in Ireland as the EU prepares to hand the world's most valuable company possibly its biggest tax penalty ever. Plus, who's hacking the election? The FBI investigates breaches at 2 state election boards and chases down stolen data. We'll break the latest developments down. And it's go time for commercial drones. We'll discuss the latest regulations as American businesses take to the skies. But first, to our lead. See you on the 7th. Apple officially acknowledges its highly anticipated product event next week. And as usual, every speck of the invitation is under scrutiny for possible hints of which product upgrades the company may reveal. Next generation iPhones and Apple Watches also on our radar. But another story looming large over the most valuable public company in the world. European regulators could announce as early as Tuesday that Apple is on the hook for up to $19 billion in taxes, Europe's largest penalty ever. This would culminate a 3-year investigation into whether Ireland gave Apple a sweetheart deal in return for creating jobs there. Joining me now to discuss, Piper Jaffray Senior Research Analyst Gene Munster in Minneapolis, University of Florida Professor Jay Ritter, an expert in international business tax laws, and our Bloomberg News reporter Alex Webb, who covers Apple with me here in the studio. So Alex, at one extreme, $19 billion, I believe that's what a JP Morgan analyst came up with. Then the Irish Times reported it would be closer to 112 million. Vastly different. What are we likely to see here?
So this 19 billion figure has been around for a couple of months and is an estimate, as we say. The Irish Times subsequently revised its number up a little bit. We think it's going to be in the handful of billions, possibly. But as we say, this is only from sources at this stage. We have to, of course, see what the actual number is when we wake up tomorrow on the West Coast.
Gene, how are you modeling this out? What's worst case scenario? What's likely scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario is the $19 billion. If that happens, let's call it about 12% of the available cash for Apple. So the number's a huge number, but it's something that investors don't give Apple much credit for their cash anyway. And so in some respects, it's a great thing to watch, but it really doesn't impact at least the valuation on the story. So that's how we would think about it, is we're planning for the worst case and thinking it's only, call it 12% hit to their cash.
Now, Jay Ritter, you're saying that worst-case scenario is unlikely. Why?
A big issue is if the Europeans play hardball too much, it's going to deter Apple and other companies from reporting any taxable income in Europe. One analogy would be an Iowa corn farmer that sells his corn to Mexico. If the Mexicans try and tax the Iowa corn farmer, what's the justification for that? There's an analogy here. Why are the Europeans taxing the income of an American corporation?
On that note, the U.S. government has actually stepped up its rhetoric in defense of Apple, Alex, recently talking about Ireland being a supranational tax authority and indicating that maybe they're overstepping their bounds. On the other hand, this issue about whether, U.S. companies have had tax havens in Europe has been going on for a long time and defrauding the U.S. government of billions of dollars.
I mean, this is the element. It's not as though the U.S. government doesn't want Apple to pay any tax. It just wants it to pay its tax here in the U.S. And so that's why it's playing, hardball in the American sense against the European authorities and against Ireland, because it wants that money to be going to U.S. coffers.
Interesting, Gene. Now, what exactly is your read on this particular situation and how serious it could be for Apple, and not just Apple, but other U.S. tech companies?
Well, from a valuation perspective, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being it's really bad, it's probably a 2 or a 3. This is something that will impact some of their cash. I think we're talking about really getting cash back to the U.S. That's the end goal here, ultimately, for Apple, and there needs to be some sort of a tax holiday. So when we think of this collectively, this is a 2 or a 3 in terms of severity, and I think that ultimately is that they'll have some small fine, and hopefully in the next president cycle, we'll have some sort of tax holiday where Apple can bring that back, not at 40%, maybe back at 20%, something more reasonable.
Jay, the European Commission has already forced some other U.S. companies to pay back taxes to the governments of Belgium, the governments of the Netherlands. What sort of cascading issues could we see after we get this decision from the European Commission?
Well, one issue is that any taxes paid in Europe are a credit against U.S. taxes. Before, there's a comment about defrauding the U.S. government. I think that's too strong. This is tax deferral. Any taxes paid in Europe would be a credit against future U.S. taxes, and that's one reason the U.S. government isn't in favor of Apple paying more taxes in Europe, because eventually it's going to result in less taxes paid in the United States.
Alex, the Financial Times is reporting that the EU Competition Commissioner, Margrethe Vestager, has already, handed out a 130-page judgment to the organization, calling this illegal state aid. She's obviously taken a very strong, anti-competition stance, and, a lot of U.S. executives, including Eric Schmidt, for example, the chairman of Alphabet, have complained that Europe is just getting more and more difficult to work with. How do you see this progressing?
I think Europe generally right now is in a tricky situation because of Brexit, I think, and so therefore there's an element of trying to ensure that Europe retains control over any number of different areas of policy. Tax is clearly one of them. It's trying to ensure that it doesn't sort of disintegrate in a kind of regulatory sense. I don't want to exaggerate the Brexit impact, but centralizing power and stamping authority for each commissioner. Vestager, I don't think has been the commissioner for that long, less than 2 years. So there is certainly an element of like stamping her authority on the remit and ensuring that they know who's boss.
Jay, could you see broader sort of international tax reform as a result of this?
It's possible. One analogy here is this is an intra-European issue, just as, for instance, Illinois offered tax incentives to get Boeing to relocate their headquarters to Illinois. Partly, the European Union is complaining that Ireland is asking Apple and other companies to pay a lower tax rate than Germany or France. So partly that's what this is all about.
Gene, any chance Apple would actually ever leave Ireland?
No, I think what's going to happen here is there's going to be some tweak in terms of how they charge U.S. companies. Apple's playing by the rules. There are other companies that are going to be impacted by it. They'll probably still do some things through Ireland, and a year from now we'll just have a higher tax rate and move forward.
Quickly.
The
one thing I think it points out from a broader European level is the kind of difficulty you have in the European Union, that there are so many different fiscal regimes across the region, and that points to one of the big problems with the whole organization, that it makes it very hard to have any sense of consistency.
All right, Alex Webb, our Bloomberg News reporter who covers Apple. Thank you. Gene Munster of Piper Jaffray, you are sticking with me. Jay Ritter, University of Florida Professor of Finance, thank you as well. Coming up, what hints are hidden in Apple's finally official invitation to its September 7th product event? We'll break down everything we know so far next. Plus, cleared for takeoff, the new regulations that could get commercial drones in the air faster. Details later in the show. This is Bloomberg. Apple's September 7th product event is now confirmed. The company sent out these digital save the dates, and as usual, it sent the internet ablaze with speculation. The out-of-focus colored lights in the background and the use of the word "C" in the text has led many to believe we'll hear about camera updates. Still with us from Minneapolis, Piper Jaffray senior research analyst Gene Munster, also our Bloomberg News reporter Mark Gurman, who's had a handful of scoops about what to expect in the weeks leading up to this. So the out-of-focus lights, depth of field, camera technology, iPhone 7 on September 7th. Any hints there?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Those out-of-focus bubbles, are pretty indicative of camera talk. The word "C," like you said in the invitation. I think there's a couple other things going on there. There's two of the dots, or whatever you want to call them, that are really more in focus than the rest. They're right next to each other. It sort of looks like the dual camera setup we were talking about on the larger of the two models. And also the round buttons are indicative of the shape of the home button. And when Apple announced the Touch ID home button with the 5S back in 2013, the invitation looked pretty similar. And then people realized after those circles are really in reference to that home button. And we're hearing that the home button on this year's model is going to be pressure sensitive. So maybe it's indicating that as well, that there's going to be home button talk.
Wow, you've taken a much closer look at this than anybody else I've heard from. Now, as you reported, we are expecting dual camera processing on the new iPhone. So basically two cameras that merge two photos into one photo that is better, brighter, more vibrant. Tell us what to expect. I know you've already basically reported out the entire event. But as of now, where does it stand?
Right, so to recap, we're hearing that there's going to be a lot of iOS and watchOS talk. So they'll be introducing the new iPhone. Maybe they'll call it the 7, maybe they'll call it the 6 SE. There's been rumors for both. The design is going to look fairly similar to the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 6. It's going to have a new pressure-sensitive home button, which means that the home button will vibrate in reaction to how hard you press on it. There'll be, of course, the new camera system, which has far better zoom, and a much faster processor, which works hand in hand with the new camera. There'll also be a new Apple Watch. We reported that's going to include new health tracking features, as well as GPS for more accurate running, but no cellular data connection this year, as we reported.
All right, Gene, I'm sure you've been paying attention to some of Mark's stories, but you've also got your own sources. Does this ring true to what you're expecting? New iPhones, new Apple Watches, not huge design changes, but some new features that Mark just mentioned.
Yeah, Mark covered it all. The only thing that I would add, I'm sure he's aware of this too, is just the headphone jack getting removed, and I don't think that's going to cause anybody to go out and buy an iPhone, so it's kind of one of those very second or third level updates. But at the end of the day, there's some important things you can do with just a better camera, and it can be anything from just how you take pictures and videos to this idea of just a device for augmented reality, which the whole Pokemon theme is playing into. And so I think it's laying the groundwork for being something a little bit more than might be at first blush.
So, how are you modeling out a potential boost in sales here? Obviously, no major design changes. Some people might not like the fact that there's no headphone jack. How many new iPhones are they actually going to sell as a result of these updates, let's say, in the fourth quarter?
So we think of this as a 4-quarter update, and in total, we think that they're going to sell about 235 million phones over the next year. Now, to put that into perspective, this is going to be the biggest cycle, the biggest wave of people with old phones coming into a cycle. And we estimate there's about 275 million people who are going to have phones that are 2 years old or older. And so, in some ways, this is not a very exciting iPhone upgrade. In other ways, that pool of really old phones should power that through. And what that means for the numbers, to get to your question, is we go from down about 10 to 15% year over year to up about 10 to 15%. So you should see a dramatic swing back in terms of the growth off of that very tough iPhone 6S cycle.
And Mark, we've talked about how they're working towards, building out their software and services, but you're still reported some new hardware enhancements coming to the iPad, coming to Macbooks. Tell us about that.
Right. These aren't likely to be shown at this event on September 7th, but Apple's working on a bunch of new Mac-related products and new iPad features. Starting with the Mac, they're working on this significant MacBook Pro update that we reported on earlier this month, with a thin digital screen with buttons on the keyboard that change based on what you're doing. So that's going to be a big update for the high-tech crowd. We're also hearing faster MacBook Airs and iMacs with new USB-C ports and graphics cards, and also that Apple's collaborating with LG Electronics out of South Korea on a new monitor. So this monitor would be 5K, which means it's 7 times the resolution and the same amount of space as your typical 1080p television, and it's even higher resolution than these 4K TVs that are starting to, move around the market. So those are going to be big updates on the Mac side.
Gene, what does this all mean for the bottom line? Obviously iPad sales haven't been growing the way they were. We've reported that laptop MacBook sales have been healthier than many expected. What do you see?
I think just don't overthink this. The bottom line is going to improve nicely. We talked about a 15% revenue boost from next year, and earnings should outpace that slightly. And so I think at the end of the day, this is still all about the iPhone, and these other products are, collectively 35% of the business. But really, it's about the iPhone. The iPhone should have a good cycle, and if we were wrong and we blow it on this one, we should catch up and have an even better cycle in 2017 with the anniversary edition.
Any possible surprises, Gene? What could that one more thing be?
I think you've done a great job reporting on all the features on this. I think it's going to be difficult to be surprised. And I think, maybe that one other thing, maybe on the content side, maybe some new partnership there, but that's a stretch.
Mark, anything we don't know?
Yeah, I don't want to speculate on anything we haven't reported, but when we do report something, you'll be the first to know. All
right, thank you. I appreciate that. Mark Gurman, our Bloomberg News Apple reporter, and Gene Munster of Piper Jaffray, as always. Thank you both. Coming up, the FBI says hackers have infiltrated the election boards of at least 2 states. This as officials warn that foreign hackers might try to meddle with U.S. elections this November. We'll tell you what we know next. Plus, hospitals are now prescribing patients a healthy dose of virtual reality. Why VR is becoming a more affordable option for doctors. That story ahead. This is Bloomberg. On today's funding board, PayTM. A digital payments and e-commerce startup is raising $300 million at a valuation of $5 billion, more than double its pre-money price tag. The latest round will be led by Taiwan's MediaTek. Existing investors include Alibaba and its payment affiliate Ant Financial, among others. It's a bright spot for venture investments in India, which has slowed this year after hitting an $8.9 billion record in 2015. The FBI is investigating hack attacks on at least 2 state election boards, one of which we know resulted in data being stolen. The more recent of the 2 hacks happened just this month. Our Bloomberg News national security reporter Nafisa Saeed is standing by in Washington with the details. So Nafisa, what exactly do we know? How were these boards breached and what was stolen?
What we know right now is that 2 states' election boards had intrusions. One was last month in July. One of the state's websites, data was stolen. And then this month, we know that a system for one of the election boards was breached. We don't know right now which states these were, and at least the FBI has not come out and said publicly what they are. We don't know exactly what kind of data was taken, but this is what we know so far. And this kind of data is pretty prized. I mean, it has voter registration information, some of which is public, but cyber criminals like to take this and maybe put it up for sale on the dark web. So far, the FBI has put out a list of IP addresses linked to these intrusions. So they're trying to figure out who actually conducted these intrusions. We don't know right now, but the FBI is asking states to check with their election boards to see if they've had similar type of activity in their logs over the last couple of months.
And again, we don't know what states were affected here, but is this something that a low-level hacker could have done, or someone would need to be quite sophisticated?
Right now, analysts are going through the code. It doesn't necessarily seem like it's something super sophisticated. I was talking to one analyst today and was saying that this is so widespread. Countries across the world face this kind of threat in terms of criminals, cyber criminals, trying to hack into elections and voter registration information, because there's a lot of personal information there that could be, valuable for people out there who want to compromise people's security. So we don't know exactly just yet, but we're trying to figure out, and that's what they're trying to link also, those IP addresses and that kind of code to maybe seeing if it looks like something that we've seen earlier in other kinds of hacks.
Now, we've been reporting, of course, the hack on the Democratic National Convention and potential links to Russia there. It's pretty clear that Russia has been involved in some way. Is there any indication that Russia or a state actor could be behind this?
Well, let's back up for a second. We've heard U.S. officials and cybersecurity firms mention that foreign nation states may try to either meddle in U.S. elections or try to hack into voting systems, especially Russia. That's what we've heard. As of now, we don't know exactly if this particular these intrusions on the state election boards are Russia. Russia has also denied being involved in the DNC hack, but we've seen this spate of incidents recently just in this year. It's been a long time concern whether whether elections can be hacked, and we've written about that before. But what's different this time that we're seeing in such a spate at one time, we're seeing a lot going on, and so I think that's kind of what is people are asking, what's the motivation? And earlier, what you said, like you said, DNC was linked to Russia, and so we'll have to be asking those questions now.
All right, our Bloomberg News national security reporter Nafisa Saeed in Washington, thank you so much for keeping us updated. Coming up, commercial drones are taking to the skies at warp speeds. We'll give you all the details. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg West. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. One of Hillary Clinton's closest aides, Huma Abedin, says she's separating from her scandal-plagued husband, former New York Congressman Anthony Weiner. He resigned from Congress in 2011 after he was caught texting intimate pictures of himself to women. Some more photos have arisen. The FBI is investigating hacking attacks on at least 2 state election boards, one of which resulted in data being stolen. That's according to an alert from the agency's cyber division. U.S. officials have raised the possibility foreign hackers might try to hack into voting systems. Taking center stage in the presidential nomination of France's Republican Party, Islamic beachwear. Former President Nicolas Sarkozy, who is looking to return to office, says he changed the Constitution to allow nationwide prohibition of the burkini. Last week, a top court struck down a local ban on the body-covering garments. Gene Wilder, the star of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and Mel Brooks comedies, has died. Wilder's nephew said today the actor and writer died over the weekend. He was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Gene Wilder was 83 years old. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 6:30 p.m. Monday here in New York, 8:30 Tuesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, some strong gains in the U.S. have seen the New Zealand index off to a strong start on Tuesday morning, up better than 0.25% after 30 minutes of trade, and futures indicate a bright start locally on the ASX in Australia and also the Nikkei in Japan. A lot of data out of Japan today. The unemployment rate for July will be out. That's expected to remain steady at 3.1%. Of course, good jobs numbers means possible wage pressure and improved hopes that the Bank of Japan might reach its 2% inflation target. We're also expecting household spending and retail sales out of Japan as well. It's going to be worth watching Mitsubishi Motors at the open. The trouble there just seems to keep on brewing. Shares are already off 50% year to date, and there's reports in local media today that a further 8 models of cars don't meet Ministry of Transport's fuel efficiency levels. That was stated by Mitsubishi Motors. A person familiar with the matter says the company may consider compensating owners if the difference between their own advertised levels and the Ministry of Transport figures are too wide. A number of earnings out of China today as well that are worth watching. Samsonite International, Bank of China and ICBC among them. I'm Paul Allen for Bloomberg TV in Sydney, Australia.
Drone pilots are racing to get licensed under new FAA regulations that just went into effect. The new rules free companies from having to request special permission from the government for commercial drone use, a process that often took months. More than 3,000 people have signed up to take the test so far, and the FAA is estimating the number of drone operators will exceed the nation's 171,000 private pilots within a year. Joining me now to discuss from New York, Verify co-founder and CEO Jay Bregman. His company offers on-demand drone insurance. And our Bloomberg News reporter, Alan Levin, joining us from Washington. So, Alan, first of all, lay out the new rules and how they'll actually impact users as of now.
Okay, so before you could fly a drone commercially, but you had to get a special exemption. Initially, it took quite a while. They streamlined it, but you had to be a licensed pilot. Now, you can just do it as a matter of course. You have to get a license, but it's much, much easier. You just have to pass a knowledge test. Those, as you said, 3,000 people signed up to take that test already today. It takes about 10 days to get the license going, but once that happens, you should be able to fly pretty much at will after that. Now, there are a few restrictions. You can't fly over people. It's daytime only and low altitude. But otherwise, it's really opening up this to a lot more people.
Jay, what do you like about these new rules? What don't you like about these new rules?
Well, what I like about these new rules is that for the first time today, you can go into an Apple store, you can buy a Phantom 4, you can go and take a test at one of 600 test centers, get vetted similar to TSA Pre, go and get insurance, and then get your certificate to be able to be a remote pilot and actually make the money back that it costs you to buy that drone in probably a number of weeks. That's really exciting for any industry.
So is there any area in which you wish these rules went farther, or anything that you dislike about them?
Well, I can tell you what our customers think. Our customers have been talking about their nervousness around the waiver process. So almost every provision of this new rule has the ability to submit a waiver online that you should have the right to fly, for example, near a certain airport or beyond visual line of sight, or other types of conditions that are normally prohibited. They're just a little bit nervous about how that process is going to work and how much time it's going to take, but time will tell.
So, Alan, talk a little bit about rules for hobbyists, or the lack thereof, because as I understand it, if you or I want to buy a drone and just use it for fun, we don't really have any rules to follow.
Yes and no. So there are no specific rules, but you are supposed to follow the safety requirements of a community or organization. And basically what that means is very much similar to this commercial rule. You're not supposed to fly over people. You're not supposed to go too high. You're not supposed to go near airports, etc. So there are certainly questions about how well that's enforced, and we've seen hundreds of reports of drones flying near planes and whatnot. But essentially, the rules are very similar.
Now, I was speaking to the Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox, last week, Jay, about this very issue and the fact that rules for hobbyists could potentially go further. What's your take on whether more regulation is needed in that area, or what?
Well, so, we don't think more regulation is needed. We think more education is needed. And really, it's about letting people know what they can and cannot be doing rather than any form of regulation, against them. And that seems to be working, by the way, very well. And the industry seems to be, in its Know Before You Fly campaign, et cetera, really making sure that there is material in every box to let people know what they should and should not be doing.
Speaking of Secretary Fox, take a listen to what he had to say about these new rules and what sort of industries they could, help open up when it comes to drones. Take a listen.
It's really going to open the door to many, many more uses that commercial users can put to UASs. On the other hand, I think as we have commercial uses, hobbyists, airplanes, like the integration of all those different uses into a single system is going to be the most complicated part of this.
So let's talk about, Jay, the industries that this will affect most. Obviously there's been a lot of talk about agriculture, transportation. What do you see?
So what we see is, on the ground, so to speak, is imaging by far is the #1 vertical. So that would be things like real estate photography, things like event photography, things like wedding photography. Anybody who's a photographer or videographer is now basically a drone photographer, and probably will be going out to get a Part 107 license. The remaining large areas are inspections, and that could mean anything from roof inspections to cell tower inspections to any other number of things that people inspected with human beings but are more efficient and safely done with drones.
Now, what about Amazon? How far off is an actual Amazon drone delivering my packages to my doorstep?
Well, so I think, Amazon is doing most of its testing in Cambridge in the UK right now. We don't really know exactly how far, they've gotten with it. From a regulatory point of view, there are some stumbling blocks inside the Part 107 regulation that they and Google and others wish had gone a little bit further, but also the potential to obtain waivers for them. So we just really have to see how the technology develops and how the process develops around these deliveries.
So, Alan, as the person who's reporting on these issues, what do you think is the next frontier, the next story, the next development when it comes to drones and drone regulation?
Well, it really does feel like we're seeing a critical mass here of change. We're going to see, by the end of the year, rules that will allow drones to fly directly over people. It's going to be relatively simple at first, just covering the drone with foam, so if it falls, it's not going to hurt anybody. The next step after that, I think, will be to give broader permission to fly long distances. So railroads, power companies want to be able to fly these things miles and miles over infrastructure to inspect them. and use video links. And once that happens, I really think we're going to see some tremendous growth. And then after that, probably these deliveries that we're talking about.
All right, Alan Levin there, our Bloomberg News aviation reporter, and Verify CEO Jay Bregman offering on-demand drone insurance. Thank you both for joining us. And a story we are watching, EU regulators are raising concerns over WhatsApp privacy changes. Last week, we learned that the Facebook-owned messaging service would allow WhatsApp data to be used for advertising and would allow businesses to reach its more than 1 billion users. This is seen as the first steps by Facebook towards monetizing the platform. EU regulators reacted to the changes today by stressing that European users need to remain in charge of their personal data. Italian and British privacy authorities also said they will probe the planned changes. WhatsApp said in a statement that it complies with existing laws and has made its privacy policy easily accessible to users. Coming up, a ride-hailing rivalry brewing in Silicon Valley. Reports of Uber shutting out Alphabet execs. We will bring you the latest. And as Fiat and Samsung discuss a possible deal, we'll hear from Fiat Chrysler CEO Sergio Marchionne on his strategic goals next. This is Bloomberg. A story we are watching. Is a partnership brewing between Fiat Chrysler and Samsung? The Italian car maker is looking for a tech tie-up so it doesn't get left behind in the race for self-driving cars. In recent months, we've seen Fiat Chrysler pursuing talks with Apple, Google, Uber, and Amazon. Here's how CEO Sergio Marchionne described his relationship with Samsung, speaking with Bloomberg TV in Rome.
We have a very good relationship with Samsung, both as a supplier and as a potential strategic partner. What I did say when I was in Sterling yesterday is that the Marelli opportunity is an opportunity that has been looked at by a variety of other people, and we said no to them because we have no interest in just selling Marelli. I think it has strategic value to us.
As we've previously reported, Samsung is in advanced talks with Fiat to buy some or all of the automaker's car parts business, Magneti Marelli. Analysts say a deal involving Marelli could become the basis for Fiat to develop self-driving cars in partnership with a tech company. Meantime, some ride-hailing rivalry brewing in Silicon Valley. Uber is reportedly blocking a senior Alphabet executive from attending the startup's board meetings, this according to The Information. Uber is also said to be keeping information from a board observer, an executive at Alphabet's venture capital arm, Google Ventures, now called GV. The development highlights mounting tension between the two companies. Bloomberg has previously reported that Google has its own ride-hailing app in development, a project that dovetails with the search giant's driverless car ambitions. If Google were to launch such a service, it would likely compete directly with Uber. Here to give us all the details, our Bloomberg News reporter, Eric Newcomer. So we reported that there's been tension, but now there are new reports that actually David Drummond, Google's chief legal counsel, isn't even allowed into the board meetings. What's new?
Yeah, we've known, Google Uber frenemy status for a while. Bill Maris, the old head of Google Ventures, had said, yeah, we started to let them do their own thing. So we'd known Google Ventures, the investor part of Google, had sort of kept its distance from Uber. And now what we really know is that Uber is saying, all right, according to The Information, David Drummond, you need to not come to our board meetings.
Now, Google Ventures invested in Uber really early on, like at a $3 billion valuation. It may not have seemed so early at the time,
right,
but now we're near a $70 billion valuation. And of course, having made that massive investment, they have certain information rights. What happens to those rights now that these two companies are going head-to-head increasingly?
I think the important thing here is that it's all about relationships right now. So, there are lots of investors with rights to information, but at the end of the day, they really care about what the Uber execs think about them, and they're not going to push for rights even when they have them in some cases. So I think you have to think about those sorts of things as negotiated and sort of sensitive, and I don't think we have full visibility into what exactly is going on there.
Right. Well, The Information reporting that David Crane, the new head of GV, they're withholding information from him. Google, Waze has gotten into ride sharing and carpooling. Google may be unveiling its own ride sharing service. Uber is also, working on self-driving cars. In fact, they're going to be the first to get a self-driving car on the road in Pittsburgh.
Right.
How do you see these companies, really butting heads in the future?
Travis, CEO of Uber, has said he sees autonomous vehicles as existential to Uber's success, and Google has clearly been, investing the longest here to build an autonomous fleet. So that, if anything, puts them right on a collision course. So I think this was sort of inevitable that there would be sort of a more public viewing of the potential and future tension of the two companies.
There are some parallels here to Google and Apple. Of course, Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Alphabet, was on Apple's board for a long time and eventually resigned. Could we see something like that happening here?
Right. It's very similar. And the funny thing with all these relationships is there's a lot of the companies are super interconnected. Uber's using Google for mapping, so at the end of the day, no matter what, even when they're competing, they're going to have a relationship.
We're actually just getting a tweet in here over the Bloomberg terminal that Alphabet's David Drummond has left the Uber board.
Got it.
So there we have it.
Yeah.
What is the significance of this?
Yeah, it firms up, I think, what's been brewing for more than a year now, which is that Google and Uber, sort of the relationship was deteriorating, and this is sort of a clean way to say, okay, no, we should take him off our board.
All right. Well, a story that I know we'll continue to report out. We'll see if anything changes with the status of David Crane, who remains an observer on the Uber board. Eric Newcomer, our Bloomberg News reporter who covers Uber. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Tomorrow on Bloomberg, do not miss a conversation with Federal Reserve Vice Chair Stanley Fischer. He sits down with surveillance anchor Tom Keene at 6:30 a.m. New York time on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And doctors are examining the effect of virtual reality on our minds, how the new technology could help with pain management next. This is Bloomberg. Forget morphine. Hospitals are now turning to virtual reality as an effective treatment for everything from intense pain to Alzheimer's to depression. And with the price of hardware falling, VR is often a more affordable option. Bloomberg's Ian King takes a look at the effects of virtual reality and how it can impact the mind.
Virtual reality is a little bit like a spotlight. The experience of the mind sort of being in this environment when it's immersed in this sort of peaceful, positive environment. It's almost like the rest of your experiences are unable to be noticed because it recruits so much of the brain to focus on that spotlight that everything outside of that environment falls to the wayside during that experience of virtual reality.
Cedars-Sinai here in LA is one of a handful of hospitals experimenting with a surprising new treatment for people suffering acute pain. I wonder if we could start by asking how long you've been here at Cedars-Sinai and what brought you here, please?
I've been here for about 4 days now. From chronic back pain.
Okay.
I'm just taking some medications and possibly an epidural very soon.
I'm in the hospital because I have a total artificial heart, and last week it had a failure. I've been on hard medication for pain for 5 years, and I'm really trying to get off of it.
So I'm constantly having pain up my left upper quadrant and my right lower quadrant. It goes into my back. I can't relax. I have had every test possible. If there was a surgery, I'd do it today.
Chronic pain is more than just a physical experience, but it's the biopsychosocial experience. And virtual reality has a way of affecting people physically, emotionally, and to some degree even socially.
I'm excited to try something different, something new.
Hey. All right. You ready? Yeah. Every time they send us a new one, it's a little bit lighter. So you want to go to Iceland? We'll try that?
Let's do that, yeah.
You afraid of heights?
I'm not.
Oh, perfect. Take a second for it to start. Virtual reality undoubtedly has an effect on the human mind. It sort of hijacks the brain. It can be used for evil, but it can also be used for good. What are you seeing?
It was like ice formations. It makes you feel like you can grab them.
You know, honestly, in the 18 years I've been practicing medicine, I can't think of anything that I've done that's more effective, and you can physically see their body language change. They often will look straight ahead like they're looking at a still image. The moment that they turn their head, that's sort of the magical moment.
It literally is like total panoramic.
360.
Yeah.
VR's backers say that at the very least it does no harm, and it's got the potential to cut down on the need for drugs like morphine, make patients more relaxed, and even have them wanting to go home sooner.
Would this be something you might reach to before, let's say, morphine?
I'm sure that I'll probably try this first, followed by the rest of the stuff.
Right.
That was, in a million years, I never would have thought that they would have brought it to a hospital to use. It really felt like I was there.
Yeah. And this helps me relax, and when the muscles relax, the pain goes away.
VR seems to take patients out of their pain, at least for a while. But it also seems to take them out of the confines of their hospital beds while they have the headsets on. For those trapped by their conditions for long periods, that may be a welcome relief and help mitigate some of the stress of being in hospital.
You know, it's kind of like a jail cell, really. I can get out, I can go around, and I can walk and everything else, but you still end up in this 4x10 room.
We need a virtual reality pharmacy. Shelves, so to speak, of VR content that's evidence-based and that I can reach off the shelf and map to my patient's needs. And the more of that we have, the broader the opportunities we have to engage patients with virtual reality. This is not about Silicon Valley entrepreneurism. It's about when and whether we should interact technology with the compelling human experience of being a patient. It's not a computing science, it's not an engineering science, it's a social science.
Bloomberg's Ian King reporting there. Now to a story trending on Facebook. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan took a trip to Vatican City to meet Pope Francis. The couple met with the Pope to discuss the importance of technology and connecting with people around the world. Zuckerberg also came bearing gifts. The Facebook CEO gave Pope Francis a model of Aquila, Facebook's solar-powered drone that will extend internet connectivity to parts of the world that don't have it. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg West. Tomorrow, an exclusive conversation with Twitter co-founder and Medium CEO Ev Williams. He'll be joining us as a guest host for the full hour. That is all today from San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.
studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose. Kenneth Branagh is here. He is currently starring in and co-directing Macbeth at the Park Avenue Armory here in New York City. The production comes here from Manchester, England, and has received extraordinary reviews. Michael Billington of The Guardian said at times he evoked golden memories of Olivier in the role. Here is a look at the trailer.
Is this a dagger which I see before me?
He is about it. The doors are open, and the surfeited grooms do mock their charge with snores. Give me the daggers. Wash this filthy witness from your hands.
Order, kings all, as the weird woman promised.
I'm pleased to have Sir Kenneth Branagh back at this table. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Thank you.
Have you been waiting to do this?
I have, circling it. It was the copy of the play I first came across was on our kitchen table when I was about, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old. My brother was doing, he's 5 years older than me, he was doing it at school. I saw these three weird sisters on the cover, asked him what it was about. It was my first introduction to Macbeth. It's the same copy of the play I have at the Park Avenue Armory with me every night, sits on my dressing room table. So that's been, waiting is, 40 years, I think, for that. So.
But do you need to do it at a time in your life?
I think I had a great old acting school mentor called Hugh Cropwell, who used to run the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and we often talked about this part, and he says, you really got to wait until you're the right age, whatever that is. But he said to me in my late 30s and early 40s, he said, you're still too young. And I didn't really understand it, but I listened to him, I revered him. It just somehow it came together through virtue of the Manchester International Festival, through meeting Rob Ashford, the brilliant co-director, and finding the right elements like Alex Kingston to be Lady Macbeth. Things started to fall together, and so it became the right time to do it.
But you'd had a 10-year absence from Shakespeare.
Yes, I had, and like many things in my career, although others may look at it and view it differently, these sort of accidents happen. You find yourself on, wonderful diversionary tracks. It's often a type. My wife jokes about it. She says people say to me, "Oh, does he read Shakespeare at home? Is it by the bedside? Does he read it?" And I said, "What do you tell him?" She said, "I tell him, yes, you do, because you're always doing that. There's Macbeth, or there's King Lear, or there's something." And that's what I do. So 10 years away from doing it, but quite a lot of years of just reading or being exposed to it or going to watch it. So it's always in my life.
How is this Macbeth different?
Well, I suppose every time a particular group of people do it, it makes it different. Here, Rob and I were keen that certain elemental parts of the piece be open. So maybe the first thing we do is to take a speech at the beginning of the play spoken by a character called the Bloody Sergeant, which is essentially the description of a battle in which Macbeth is extremely brave and heroic. Fearless, in fact. Interesting for a character who will become fearful for most of the play. And we took that, we dared to take that away and put what he describes on stage. So, and we wanted to do it for a couple of reasons. Firstly, so that when you meet Macbeth, you know a little of what they really mean about this fearlessness, the savagery of his combat, i.e. a man who you imagine on first blush should not have the problems that he turns out to have later on when faced with another murder in battle. He seems fearless. But what we chiefly wanted to do was to introduce to the audience a theatrical energy which was hectic and hurtling, and in which they can viscerally be part of the hectic nature of the circumstances, which mean these two, I think, fundamentally at the beginning of the play, good people make very bad decisions because the play, circumstance, the plot doesn't give you time to think.
Ben Brantley of the New York Times, who loved the play, captured that very thing. I mean, he said you're hurtled forward from the beginning of the play, and it has that kind of energy.
Yeah. Well, because you're always so interested in this in terms of what goes on in the corridors of power, and when one thinks about why and how these two people could do this extraordinary thing, when one thinks about it in plays, it can be easy to sort of think about it in melodramatic terms, but this man kills a friend of his, a friend who is the king, the president, or whatever, and he does it very swiftly, and he does it even though other people describe him as being conscienced, and so this other people dismiss the play, said it's absurd because all that happens too quickly. Our production was trying to say perhaps these things only happen quickly, you know, without thought.
And would he have done it without his wife?
Well, she, I think, accurately describes him as being not without ambition, but without the sickness should attend it. Thou art too full of the milk of human kindness. There are lots of remarks about an essentially good nature, but once he's had this amazing success, the reviews are brilliant, as it were, that Duncan says, fantastic, I'm gonna give you I'm planting you, and you're going to be having all sorts of rewards. And then he says,
a new name even.
Yeah, and a new name, but exactly. You get a great big honour. But actually, I'm giving my job to him, my son.
Right.
And immediately, Macbeth is suddenly there's a man with the witch's pronouncement in his mind just a few short moments ago, saying, well, why should he be in the way? I'll have to either it's a step that lies in my way, which I must on which I must fall down, or else or leap. Or leap has is inverted commas around it, because or leap means murder basically in this context. So it's just it's a wonderful play for putting people in this unusual extreme position, but making them feel like it could be them.
The witches are great. I mean, you see them opening up in a Stonehenge kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary. And then their prophecies one by one.
Yeah.
And so he's got to believe something.
What do you feel about that?
I'm destined for something.
What do you feel about that sort of this in the lives of the good and the great, as it were, the power of suggestion? I mean, some people would say Macbeth's a silly play because it's about a man who believes his horoscope. I mean, so someone, I mean, for whom everything is going well.
I think men and women of power believe in myth too.
Interesting, yeah, and also a place in history, and this idea of what what the legacy is. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth appear not to be able to have children, or they haven't had them successfully. So immortality is not guaranteed by family.
Yeah.
So now immortality can perhaps be seized by having your name in the history books, being King Macbeth.
But I mean, the relationship between the two. I mean, she's more ambitious than he is.
I think she's differently ambitious, and one of the things we tried to bring in was this savage world where when she says goodbye to him and he goes off to battle, the idea of whether he comes home or not is really, very heavily questioned. And when they do come back, what we did present is this, we always wanted to present this very functioning relationship. I mean, they fancy the pants off each other, and it's very passionate. Some people...
The passion that comes out, clear.
I mean, Ian McKellen would argue, he did a one-man show years ago where he said there are no successful marriages in Shakespeare, except, he says, the Macbeths. Which is strange, of course, because they both die and they kill a king along the way. But I always felt in the first conversation I had with Alex were about the for me central to the show and to the performance is that he adores her. He adores her. She's a natural companion for him, and I think that the breakup of that relationship. But
is she stronger or weaker?
Well, again, I would say she's they both at different times invoke the dark world.
They do.
She's the first one to say, right, I'm inviting evil into the room. We're in a world where we believe in it. You, audience, you've just seen it because they were hanging around those stones and they're scary. I'm inviting them in. She's the first, so she has balls enough to do it, first time out. But then the balance of power within that relationship switches, and she she, at least interestingly, isn't this interesting from a male-female point of view? As it were, he's the one who says, let's not do it tonight. She says, you've got to seize the opportunity now. Then they get it. He becomes president, as it were. And she says, now leave everything alone. But for him, now it has to be, he's got to be president and square off.
But wasn't that part of the prophecies from the witches, too?
Well, it was, but
I mean, he was scared because of what they had said, so therefore he went off killing anybody.
Yeah. But essentially trying to, square the circle with all of those things. And of course, the key thing is Banquo, who's been predicted to be the father of kings. He tries to kill both him and his son. And his determination to leave no stone unturned means that he won't ever sleep again. And that there is no satisfaction. And the first moment we see him as king, he's with her and they celebrate and the production houses walk down at the coronation. He sits down and says, to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. You know, I've got now I have to, I'm here, I've got a crown, I've got a throne, and it's nothing, it's nothing. There's a moment later
to be safely.
Yeah, to be safely thus is, you know, and then this splurge of paranoia comes up.
You thought about doing it in the way up in the future. You were going to do a very futuristic kind of.
Yeah.
And what drew you away from that to where you are?
This difficult thing of when you come up with a sort of what you might call a strong concept for the world of the play, and all these plays are very elastic, so they can accommodate them. Though Shakespeare survives anything that we might try and trip him up with. But many times, the idea ultimately has some reductive quality. You might get you set the Merchant of Venice in the New York Stock Exchange, and you might get a fantastic sort of resonance with the world of money. But the play is also about love, and there's the whole of the fifth act is about whether the girl is going to choose the boy or whatever it might be. So ultimately, the futuristic Macbeth felt as though it potentially just denied the savagery and the primitive nature of some of these motivations. Right at the end of the play, Malcolm, the new king-to-be, says, we're going to make those who helped me here earls, the first that Scotland ever had. And you sense there's a journey from a primitive world into a more so-called civilized world where people in power will give you an honour, and then you won't be fighting them.
It's funny, it's interesting and fascinating to me about Shakespeare. And first of all, that I think I read somewhere that James V, who became James I of England, would come to Shakespeare plays?
Yes, indeed, and in fact was also the author of a famous book on demonology. So he was particularly obsessed with the subject that Macbeth deals with.
Yeah, and the story of Macbeth, some people think he got from the Holinshed Chronicles. Am I saying that right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, absolutely right. Yes, He was. Shakespeare was fantastically comprehensive in where he went for all his stories, and also quite the. He knew how to borrow and he knew how to be inspired. When we did recently, Alex Kingston and I also had the pleasure of doing Antony and Cleopatra on radio, and there's a famous speech in there about her, Enid Barbus, when he said the barge she sat on like a burnished throne burned on the water. He talks about how
some people make comparisons between the two.
Yes, there is. Certainly in terms of the central focus on a relationship between two complicated people, a powerful man with a brilliant woman, and they have sort of balancing impacts. But the barge speech in Thomas North's Lives of the Ancient Romans, etc., Shakespeare pilfers fairly comprehensively. So he scattered his gatherings, but always transformed.
Somebody once said every writer steals, a great writer steals a lot, or something.
Yeah.
There's also this in terms of this when you. There are all these soliloquies that you have, these lines, and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Did you approach those differently? I mean, did you have a mindset about them that you wanted to, in your own vision, not because you wanted to be alike or different than anyone else who had been Macbeth, but some sense of how you wanted to take these pivotal moments?
Well, they all try
and deliver them.
It's an interesting question. For instance, with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, it seemed that it grew organically out of this idea that aside from the sort of vast and dense existential howl that you might describe it as being. It is also specifically and particularly at the beginning of the speech a sort of a speech of mourning for his wife.
Right.
And in our production, that is so sort of underlined, the passion between them, that the dynamic between the simple, painful personal loss of a woman that he adored through his own strutting and fretting and idiocy, if you like, informed the way that came out. So it became very personal. We wanted to take away from the show what I've seen sometimes in versions of the play, which is perfectly fine, but not to my taste for this particular play, that it be too dry, too intellectual. These are extreme.
You did not want that.
Yeah, I didn't want it to be dry.
You wanted it to be what? Real?
Well, visceral, passionate. It just that there is as much emotional intelligence in the play as there is philosophical intelligence. It can get very dry because the poetry is so dense, it's so brilliant, it's so complex. But you know, the double up with Shakespeare is if you can connect all of that brilliance, all of that sort of intellectual firepower at this incredible level with the sense that you're watching real live human beings, and there, but for the grace of God, go all of us.
Dealing with all the issues that everybody faces in life, whether it's life and death, or
or here, you know,
jealousy or rage, or guilt, or in this case, guilt.
Yeah, guilt. And people, my goodness me, you can feel the atmosphere in the audience when they have done swiftly, within 20 minutes of the beginning of the play, in an atmosphere where the audience are sort of, you know, backing away from the thing is throbbing.
Exactly.
And then they've done it. So they put the cold steel in the flesh of the person they knew. So King Duncan getting a prize. No, I killed one of our friends, and now what do? And suddenly they become like children almost. Now, that irrevocable moment, I think people understand in their own lives. They may not kill a king, of course, but they're going to do things from which they can never recover, and in 1 nanosecond, life will never be the same again. Shakespeare writes about it, and you feel all of those people going, oh my God, if, you know, that could be me.
Right. Either because of choices you made or because of things that were thrust upon you.
Yes, and of course it's terribly moving. One of the things we've been thrilled at is people find the particular production moving. You know, why should you feel moved or even sympathetic to characters who perform such heinous acts? But somehow Shakespeare's mastery,
genius,
it allows you by the end, when he loses her and when he can convey, either in Lady Macbeth's sort of descent into what may appear to be madness, or just you already sense with Macbeth at the end, sounds a grand thing to say, but the play does it, the bleakness in his soul is so profound that it's chilling. The glimpse of a kind of dark eternity that he shows us is so terrifying that you can't help but be moved, because the price he has paid for this moment of reckless ambition is so deep and profound as to shake one to the very core on his behalf.
And lead to his death.
Yeah. And one thing, isn't it strange, you know, at the end, we talked about he's fearless in battle at the beginning. Then, through the power of suggestion, he is fearful and guilt-ridden, dream-laden and sleep-deprived for most of the play. And right at the end, what does he have left that Shakespeare seems to admire in some of his male characters, particularly what I'd call these soldier poets, Antony, Othello, Macbeth? He's just, you know, it's a simple thing to say, he has guts. He has guts. And so, you know, he's right there at the end. I'm not going to kiss the ground before Malcolm's feet. You know, but, yeah, the forest moved and you weren't born of woman and they're against me. You know what? Come and get it. Come, and we may say that's a sort of ridiculous quality, but I think
I love it.
Shakespeare somehow said, well, what else you got? What else you got?
Show me something.
Yeah, exactly. And he hangs in there. He's just, somehow there is a profound respect for this kind of, so I never ran away. And he talks to her and to Banquo, compliments them both. Two words that two times he uses the word dauntless. Dauntless, and he admires that, and I think Shakespeare admires, and I do, people who, whatever life throws at them, they just put one more foot in front of the other, and the other one, and just get up. What else can you do? Shakespeare often says that. It ought to feel grander than that, but sometimes that's all there is to do, is show up.
I mean, in your own pantheon, is there 1, 2, 3 among Shakespeare's works?
Oh, gosh, what a question. your life changes,
Yes,
and
exactly.
you know,
And you have more experiences,
You react
you've seen
differently
more.
to things, you know, and you. He's so comprehensive. You've had many brilliant conversations with Harold Bloom, who would
Sure,
say
I
that
have,
Shakespeare invented the human. As you've heard, Jan Kot, famous Polish scholar of the particularly famous in the 60s, called him our contemporary. John Gielgud just said Hamlet, a play like Hamlet, sums up the process of living. I feel that applies across many of these plays. Right now, one's soul is shaken by what Macbeth does to the audience. We're there. We are the lucky vessels through which this thing passes currently in this particular show.
So 5 minutes before you're going to go on, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you saying to yourself?
I'm meditating is what I'm doing.
Really?
Yeah, I'm meditating.
Clearing your mind.
Yeah, I'm getting ready. My favourite quote from Shakespeare is the end of Hamlet. The readiness is all. And it applies to many things, I think. So you get there and you're ready. And my whole day really is devoted to getting ready to that moment. That's all I do right now. You know, people say, oh, you're having a wonderful time in New York. Well, yes, but partly because I'm at the theatre hours and hours and hours before any sane human being would be. I do my meditation, I listen to tapes, I read, I do the lines every day. You do the whole play in varying ways. You trick yourself to try and keep it fresh. But in the 5 minutes before you go on, yeah, you meditate. And the other thing, I swear to God, I think that this is just the most fantastic thing to be able to do. I mean, it's really tingly, and you know it's not an easy thing to do, given that it's, you know, one's aware of the sort of effort of it in terms of what we do. But it's an absolutely glorious thing to do. I sometimes feel like as you know, I'm a big fan of sport generally, and it feels like you're in the tunnel waiting to come out before a huge game, and it's like tournament tennis or something. Some of it's up here, some of it's in the body, some, you know, and in our case, we start with a 5-minute battle.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So then you rest.
That just revs you up.
Oh man, does it rev us? Because we've got to practice those fights every day because they're dangerous. It's raining. We're in the dark. There are 25 enormously butch fellas coming at us with pieces of cold steel.
So you've got to be athletic too.
Yeah, you've got to have it's an all-consuming thing. I think I've learned more about the discipline required for doing this on this particular job than ever before.
Great to have you here.
Thanks very much.
Back in a moment. Stay with us. Mark Rylance is here. He won a Tony Award for his performance in Boeing in 2007 and a second Tony for Jerusalem in 2011. He is back on Broadway at the Belasco Theatre playing the lead in 2 Shakespeare plays in repertory. He is King Richard in Richard III and Olivia in Twelfth Night. Both productions made their debut at London's Globe Theatre, where he served as artistic director from 1995 to 2005. Charles Isherwood of the New York Times has written, Rylance's presence on Broadway this season provides a miniature masterclass in Shakespearean acting. I am pleased to have Mark Rylance at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thanks, Charlie.
What a nice tribute for Mr. Isherwood.
Yeah.
How did this happen, these 2 plays coming here for you to show your stuff?
Oh, how did it happen? It's taken quite a few years. The particular artist, the director and the clothing designer, set and clothing designer, and the musical director, and the kind of core players were people that worked with me a lot when I was artistic director at the Globe. And when my time finished, my 10 years finished, I immediately set about wanting to, I suppose, preserve or carry on the essential core work of what we did, which was a very careful and I hope rigorous attempt to explore what I call original playing practices, what we know of them from Shakespeare's day. And it took a long time. We had to figure a way of mounting 2 productions that would be popular enough to raise enough money to make a whole new wardrobe of clothes, as the Elizabethans spent their money on what they wore on their backs.
Yeah.
And it's with 6 live musicians and 15 or so
Now, what was the
actors.
term you used in terms of original production?
Original playing practices, original practices.
Yeah, what's
that was kind of what inspired Sam Wanamaker, the American who founded the Globe, which was that there should be not only an intellectual inquiry into how the plays might have originally been played and what conditions Shakespeare imagined when he wrote these wonderful plays, but that there should be a laboratory, so to speak, where you could explore with a live audience and live players. And so he spent the last 25 years of his life building the Globe Theatre and died in '93. And I became artistic director in '95. And his thinking about the Globe was really the inspiration for me, which was that he demanded 3 things: very, very thorough research, accurate materials. So he fought very hard, Sam, for the building to be thatched. It's the first building thatched since the Great Fire. I think 1,000 oak trees went into it, lime plaster, all kinds of old building techniques, and that original craft should be used as well. So
the premise was we would be more inside of Shakespeare's head if we did that, or his pen.
We would learn. We would learn more about the reason he wrote the plays and the way he wrote them. We would be able to look at questions of the amount of time it takes, how fast did they speak, how fast did they play, were the plays cut to 2 hours, were they played very rapidly to make it 2 hours? Was the 2 hours just to do with amphitheaters, and were they played at a longer time in indoor playing houses? How did, I mean, for an actor, the space is remarkable because there's no lighting, or it's daylight. They only played in the afternoon. There are 2 whopping great pillars, so there's nowhere you can stand where some people in the audience won't be able to see you, but everyone can hear you like a bell. Yeah. So the fact that at that time a commentator like yourself, if they went to the Globe, would have said, I went to hear Julius Caesar. They never said I went to see a play at the Globe. They went to hear it. And so it immediately demanded, in my time at least, a lot more rigor and work on our eloquence and our speaking.
Before we talk about these 2 plays, 10 years as artistic director of the Globe Theatre. You know? I mean, if you were asked to give a last lecture about Shakespeare, what would you want us to know?
Well, what comes to the top of my head immediately may not be the deepest answer, but it is you just can't. You'll never get to the bottom of his sense of humor, that his sense of wit and humor. Obviously, it's well known that one of the great things he's really good at doing is marrying opposites, at juxtaposing opposing sounds, hot ice, cold fire, these kind of things that Romeo says at one point, but also juxtaposing tragedy and comedy. And his deep sense of humor, even in the most tragic moments, it still staggers me. It still staggers me. I don't generally find it myself. I find it in performance with an audience. There's something about...
Well, the audience tells you what's humorous.
Well, you know, Charlie, I've come to feel that there's a collective thing that happens when a whole group of people focus on something. Maybe religions know this and have known it forever, but it happens in theatres as well. If you get a whole audience focusing on one topic or one story, in the case of Shakespeare, and they're all in the same room, it feels that each of our individual minds are capable of something more when we're together focused on something, as if the internet is just a manifestation of something that exists naturally in human consciousness, that there's a collective consciousness in the room.
Yeah. You mean that the coalescing of everything is much larger than the sum of the individual parts?
Yeah, so the wit the wit, particularly in the Globe, which unlike most theatres which are more rectangular or square-shaped, the Globe is a circular building, obviously, and that collective experience of playing there for 10 years really awakened this to me even more. The sense of humour of the author is the thing I would say that I would hope would take a long time before the universe destroys that.
Your interest in Shakespeare goes way back to high school, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It does. I skipped the rest of the parts and just played Hamlet at 16.
Yeah, but you've since played Hamlet, Romeo, Macbeth, Olivia, you know.
I think I've been in 52 productions of plays by Shakespeare or his contemporaries. Middleton, other people at the time, yeah.
So is there any better training for an actor?
Oh, I would have thought so. I would think they're much finer actors than me.
No.
I mean,
to really get your teeth into Shakespeare and Shakespearean characters, is that the best possible training for an actor?
No, I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm not someone who's of the opinion that Shakespeare should be loved by everyone, or is meant for everyone,
or somehow because of the range and it gives you an opportunity to really dig deep into understanding human nature, therefore understanding acting, therefore a larger ability to inhabit different characters.
Depends how you approach it, doesn't it? I mean, you know, Picasso, you and I could get the same set of paints that Picasso used, but would we necessarily come up with the same thing? I don't know. So it depends.
No, because it doesn't come from the paint, it comes from the head.
Yeah, and
it
comes from your life and
exactly.
the way in which you deal with the Shakespeare material. But I don't know that Robert Mitchum or Spencer Tracy or Montgomery Clift or Branagh.
No, very different.
Branagh actually gives one of the best Shakespeare performances, for my taste, I've ever heard as Mark Antony.
Does he really?
Yeah. Though also in that film you get a fantastic performance from Gielgud. Very fast as Cassius, incredibly fast.
Now, why is Brando as Mark Antony so good for you?
Because he's so present. Because for me, I totally believe that those words have never been said before, and that he absolutely needs to convince the friends, the Romans, the countrymen of
that's the
situation.
Key. So, I mean, that's been said here before at this table. Convince people that these words have never been said before, and I have just thought them.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's great to have you here. Stephen Fry is here. He's an actor, comedian, writer, television presenter, documentary filmmaker, and political activist. That's a lot. He has interviewed Steve Jobs for Time magazine, been to prison, and at Cambridge, he thought he would devote his life to studying Shakespeare. He is currently making his Broadway debut, playing Malvolio in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. I am pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Nice to be here, Charlie.
How is it to be on Broadway in this remarkable production and playing with...
It is a remarkable production, and for those who don't know, remarkable not just because it has, I think, the greatest stage actor in the world, in the English-speaking world anyway, Mark Rylance, who's playing Richard III. It's a double bill.
But this production first started in London.
It did, at the Globe, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, the outdoor theatre that the great Sam Wanamaker pioneered. And so we've had to bring it in slightly, because the Globe is a bit like your table. It's what Shakespeare called the wooden O. And this is, of course, TV's wooden O, where all the great ideas ideas get expanded and expanded.
Well, you flatter me, but
yeah. So you have the sort of half of it, as it were, is people standing. It's called the yard, and they're called the groundlings, and they would have paid a penny in those days. And then there are these tiers of grander people, where the aristocracy or the middle classes would sit and watch. And it's more or less the same now. In other words, except people queue for a long time in line to get the standing up seats. You can't call it a standing up seat, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Because they so love it. They love it. They literally put their elbows on the stage. And the relationship you have with the audience is utterly unique. There's nothing like it. It's completely... You realise that every soliloquy is a conversation.
This is an all-male cast?
This happens to be an all-male cast. It's what's known as an original practices cast. Not everything.
That's right. Mark talking about that idea of the original practice.
So every single element of the play is, as far as scholastically we know, absolutely as it would have been in Shakespeare's day. We know that in 1602, when Twelfth Night was first performed, it was performed indoors, in fact, in the Middle Temple, which is one of the legal halls, medieval halls, that the lawyers used. And we know what the hall looks like because it hasn't changed since Shakespeare's day. And we know, of course, that this happened a lot because English winters are pretty famous. The summers are pretty famous. But during the hours of daylight, you can use the wooden O and the outdoor theatre very happily. But you've got the whole half of the rest of the year to keep your actors, from starvation. So you go to lawyers' halls, Oxford and Cambridge colleges, the houses of nobility, and you played your plays there. So you had to cut them to... and this new one was clearly written for an indoor theatre. You can sort of tell, and for intelligent lawyers and people to come and watch. But which is not to say that it's a very difficult play. It's a hilarious, rumbustious farce. And
I want to talk about your character, but let me just come back. Did you want to be a Shakespearean scholar, or is that simply something that's grown up about you?
No, it is kind of true. It was the thing I was best at university, was for some reason.
Which was Cambridge?
Cambridge, yeah. I found it easiest to write on Shakespeare. I loved reading his plays. I loved performing in them at Cambridge. And I thought I'd do a doctoral thesis on some aspect of Shakespeare, and quietly grow tweed in the corner of a court of a college somewhere. As one of my contemporaries has. He's become the greatest Shakespearean scholar in Britain, Jonathan Bate. He was exactly mine. He's now Provost of Worcester College, Oxford.
Talk to me about the part, and make sure I'm saying this right. Malvolio?
Malvolio is the way we say it.
Okay, Malvolio.
It's very hard to say who's right. We don't know how it's pronounced.
I'll take you.
There's a theory that American English is closer to Shakespearean English than our current English. But
especially American Southern English is closer to Shakespearean English.
You do hear this. Well, Malvolio means, in its sort of Latinate cognates, it means ill will. There's a character called Benvolio in another play, not by Shakespeare, which means, well disposed. So his name means ill disposed, ill will, Malvolio. Also, rather bizarrely, there are all these strange little sort of anagrammatic connections, because there's Viola and Olivia. And Malvolio. So there are lots of Volia, I live Olivia characters. Anyway, Malvolio is the steward to Olivia, who is a countess, who is in mourning because her father died, and then very quickly her brother died. So she's in charge of this vast estate, and she has her steward, Malvolio. And she has an uncle, Uncle Toby, who's a drinker. And she has a chambermaid, Maria, who's very charming. And she has a fool, Feste, who tells her things she doesn't like to hear, a bit like King Lear has. And the nearby duke's deeply in love with her, but she won't have anything to do with it, and swears that for 7 years she will wear a veil and not look at the face of man. A shipwreck happens on which a twin brother and sister each believe the other drowned. The sister comes up, and a sea captain has rescued her. She says, what can a woman do on her own in this strange country? What is it? And it's called Illyria. Oh, my brother's drowned. What am I going to do? How will I ever get back to Messina, where I come from? And there's a trunk of clothes where her brother's clothes are. She says, dress me as a man and take me to the local ruler, this Duke Orsino. I've heard my father speak of him. Present me as a eunuch, so I'll be like a boy. So she dresses as a boy, calls herself Cesario, and serves Olivia, who starts to fall in love with him. but we know she's a girl.
Yes.
So it's really weird. Meanwhile, Sebastian has survived and looks exactly the same, and he is being taken around by Antonia, who's an old pirate, but who has fallen in love with him in a, we don't quite know what way, but the language is very strong, so it's often used by those who kind of push the homoerotic nature of some of Shakespeare's plays far. He does talk about his absolute devotion and love, pure love, as he calls it, for Sebastian. And they never meet until this final, absolutely farcical moment, until they suddenly are on stage both at the same time, looking identical. And they both go, and Antonio, the pirate, says, Sebastian, are you? And he says, well, how can you doubt that? And he says, well, how have you made division of yourself? An apple cleft in twain is not more, you know. And they look at each other and they can't believe it. And phew, it means that Viola can actually marry Sebastian, who is actually a man who looks exactly the same as the girl she thought she wanted to marry, and the girl can marry the Duke. And meanwhile, I have terrible tricks played on me because I'm a shape of things to come. I'm a Puritan, or at least there's a moment where I'm described as a Puritan, though in fact Mariah quite rightly says the devil is a Puritan. He's whatever he wants to be or whatever he thinks will impress people. But I certainly don't like other people having a good time, and I like to be the boss, and I'm very pleased with myself, and I assume everybody adores me. And they play this very, very cruel trick on me by leaving a letter lying around in public, which looks as if it's a secret letter from Olivia the Countess to me to say that she loves me, and telling me to wear particular clothes,
including
yellow stockings, cross-gartered, and to smile all the time. And as it happens, she hates yellow stockings, doesn't like cross-gartering, and is not in the mood for people smiling when she's grieving for her brother and her late father. So it's all to make Malvolio look a fool, and he ends up in a prison, and he nearly goes completely mad.
So tell me how you approached, and what was it for you as an actor to get inside of Malvolio?
Some people may say he's a pompous, self-regarding ass, and therefore it took very little of a stretch. I think, as with all acting, it sounds... People often find this very pretentious. Indeed, any time an actor opens his mouth, it seems to be pretentious. Our job is simply to entertain people, and we don't necessarily need to explain the process, but people ask, and so we politely answer. And the fact is, you have to believe in your character. You have to see it from his point of view. It's that simple. And Malvolio, he genuinely thinks he's keeping the house calm. He thinks that the influences of, like, the Fool and Mariah and Sir Toby, who drinks a lot, are bad, and that he thinks he would make a wonderful husband for Olivia. And he even thinks there is example for it. The Lady of the Strait, she married the yeoman of the wardrobe. You know, so there are local references to times when, you know, some servant has married their mistress or master, and so he just goes off into a fantasy land. Other people have played him as really quite wicked, or indeed as highly comic.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Charlie.
John Lithgow is here. He is an actor who has won Emmys and Golden Globes for his television performances, Tony Awards on stage, and twice been Oscar-nominated for his work in film. He is now playing one of the most demanding and challenging parts ever written for the stage. Obviously, you know I'm talking about King Lear. The show is a public theater free Shakespeare in the Park production. It plays at the Delacorte Theater in New York Central Park through August 17th. I am very pleased to have John Lithgow on this program to talk about Lear and much more. Thank you for coming.
Great to be here, Charlie.
How does the great John Lithgow and the great play King Lear come together in New York?
The play is much greater than I am. I have been nagging Oscar Eustis for years and years to at least consider me for it. Probably, the first I mentioned it to him was probably long before I should have played it. But now I think I've just entered that interesting window of opportunity for Lear when you're young enough to play it because you still got the strength, but you're old enough to play it because you can bring a little bit of authenticity to an old man losing his viability. I knew it better than I even realized. I've seen it so many times in my life. I played the role of Gloucester in college, but I figured it's going to be such a demanding part. The rehearsal period is going to be so tough. The last thing I want to do is to go home and study words in the night. So I learned it completely cold by the first day of rehearsal. The first time I've ever done that. And sure enough, I mean, it was a process of stamina building, rehearsing it.
Talk about learning it, because you said you had a UCLA student come in. He would cue you so that you would know the lines that led to your lines.
Well, he
would read you your lines too.
He would just sit and listen, correct me as I. Actually, in my days on Third Rock from the Sun, I worked out an extremely efficient way of memorizing great gobs of material because it came at you very fast, and it was a very, very wordy and fast-paced show. I trained my assistant to feed me my lines with a 3-minute pause between every 3-second pause between every single word, including a, and the. And I would drill the line in all those pauses, and I could learn a speech like that once through. Well, that's how I went about studying.
There's a reason I'm interested in this, that the idea of memorizing things is a great fascination for me.
Well, and it gets harder as you get older.
And making speeches so you don't have to refer to notes.
Yes, right.
That whole thing.
But with Lear, there's also a superb internal logic to the writing. Somehow or other, I've absorbed it over the years. All those brilliant and vivid speeches.
What is the challenge of playing it outside?
It's less of a challenge than a marvelous opportunity. It's a big play full of gigantic passions and gigantic ideas, and I'm a very, very tall actor.
Yes.
It's as big as the big outdoors, and you know, doing it at the Delacorte with this hungry audience, this audience of passionate New York theater goers who waited all day to get their tickets. They're so hungry for it. They're just completely gripped by it. When the elements come along, we've had 2 nights of rain, and yet we've performed the thing anyway. They stay right with us. In fact, they think it's even better in the rain. After all, I do get to say blow winds and crack your cheeks.
Yes. The idea of so many great actors have performed this. Did preparation include watching, understanding, looking at those performances, not to imitate them, but just to understand the range of interpretation?
Well, I calculated that I've seen 10 productions of Lear over the years. Yeah. And you certainly remember all sorts of things about individual performances. I remember them all. The most vivid, I think, was the very first couple of times I saw it. I saw Paul Scofield do it in that great production in 1964.
Who directed that?
Peter Brook.
That's right. Peter Brook did. Yeah.
And at that, it was like I saw it 3 nights ago. I remember it so vividly. This year I stopped. There have been a lot of Lears, and I stopped seeing them. I think the last one I saw was Derek Jacobi.
Yeah. So you didn't see Langella, people like that?
I didn't see Frank or Simon Russell Beale or Bill Pennington. There have been a lot of them, but at a certain point I had to I had to make it completely my own with no one sitting on my shoulder.
Did you see it? Was it a production put on by your father?
You know, he did put it on, but when he put King Lear on, I was 7 years old.
Yeah,
and
so it didn't mean anything.
My parents knew I wouldn't last till the end. So, no, the first time I saw it was in 1962, the first season of Shakespeare in the Park at the Delacorte.
Wow.
With Frank Silvera in the role. And it completely throttled me. I mean, that you remember. You remember just the impact of a play like this. It was like the first time I ever saw Death of a Salesman.
Are there, speaking of Death of the Salesman, are there other things that you very much want to play that when you look at all the things you have done, are there missing elements for you in terms of great characters?
I would say the only one was King Lear.
Yeah.
I don't have any bucket list play or part anymore.
Nothing from Chekhov, nothing from...
I'm about to do A Delicate Balance on Broadway, and I'm thrilled to be doing that, but it's not something I've been waiting my whole career to do. King Lear is. In my experience, all the most exciting things I've done have been other people's bright ideas, things that I never even thought of myself for. Other people think of you in ways that you don't, sometimes in ways that you don't think of yourself.
Tell me who he is. Who is Lear?
Well, in our Lear, he is, we see him as a kind of exuberant and manic and exciting man, a beloved monarch. But he's aging to the point where he's probably always had a strain of manic temper. And it is Dan Sullivan's wonderful concept, in my opinion, that the first time you see him, he's extremely excited about this plan for dividing his kingdom. Like it's something he just thought of. It hasn't really thought through yet. And his fool is in the scene. You get a sense of him being a very robust man with a huge open heart and a great sense of humor. But he's aged more than people realize. And
some people ask the question, is he mad from the beginning, or does he lose his mind over the process of the play?
That's an extremely good question, and it's the number one challenge, is calculating how he goes mad. I think there is the beginnings of a propensity for madness. I think when he explodes completely irrationally at Cordelia, it's a shock to her. She's probably seen his temper before, but she's never seen it like this. And she's never seen it that insane. I mean, this is the person in his whole life that he loves the most. And it's almost because of the intensity of that love that his anger at her has such intensity. So for everyone, it's a new shock. Goneril and Reagan together, they talk about how, you know, we've been seeing more and more of this.
Yeah.
Then in succeeding scenes, you see different versions of madness as he declines into a real derangement and dementia. And the entire challenge with Dan Sullivan's like exquisite guidance is just finding those benchmarks, finding the moments. For an example, the moment when his madness, he has these huge temper tantrums with his daughters, all three of them. That propels him a certain distance toward madness. But then he's shut out in a wild and crazy storm. Then he meets a mad beggar. And the sight of that mad beggar, poor Tom, who is Edgar in disguise, sort of kicks it all into yet another degree. Suddenly he sees, this is the solution. This is unaccommodated man. No more but such a poor bare-forked animal as thou art. You know, the scales fall from his eyes. He's going mad, but it's taking him toward...
As he goes mad, he's coming through to some kind of...
Yeah, madness is
vision.
It's like it's cauterizing wounds. It's like it's clearing his brain in lots of ways.
When you recite Shakespeare, when you speak Shakespeare, you just feel what? You feel, I am so in touch with the gods of expression.
Well, I don't know. I feel like it's a musician sight-reading marvelous chamber music or something. You just. A lot of Shakespeare is very familiar to me by now, so it's as a lot of classical music is familiar to musicians. It's just, I read those speeches and they, you know, there's this incredible intersection of poetry and emotion that Shakespeare, to me, it's the very best example of that. You can look at it purely in terms of the beauty of the language, or you can look at it in terms of the power of the meaning, and Shakespeare's extraordinary empathy. Well, he manages to do the same thing with the same phrases. You know, that thing that I just quoted
so
you.
Where do you put Lear in all the characters you have played in Shakespeare?
Well, I actually have not done that much Shakespeare. I've done about 20 plays, but most of it was before I was 20 years old, and in small roles in my father's companies.
Macbeth.
I did play Macbeth in college. I played Malvolio with the Royal Shakespeare Company a few years ago. But this is the first time I've taken on one of the gigantic roles, one of the big four.
Do you wish you had done more?
Yeah. Yeah, I stupidly turned down Hamlet a few times.
Wow.
Yes, I had other things to do.
But was it things like television and?
I think it was other plays.
Plays and movies. I mean, because there is this sort of thing that people who are not of the theater think. That would be me. That every actor feels like, that's worth his salt, feels like, I have to take on Hamlet. Well, but you didn't feel that.
Yeah, I didn't have a burning desire. I have to tell you, to be honest, what I like working on most is new material. I love working with writers and creating something that nobody has seen before. I think there may be something eatable going on. This was very much my father's world.
Yeah. Really?
And I'm a terrible snob. I only want to be in great productions of Shakespeare.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
I'm Mike Barnacle.
I'm John Heilman, and with all due respect to George Stephanopoulos, WTF?
I'm going to expose myself here.
You don't know what YOLO means.
You only live
You only live once. YOLO! That's what I say when I want to buy something. I was like, YOLO!
YOLO. Okay, good to know that.
Mike Barnacle knows what YOLO means.
I do. I've known it for
He's
years.
an old man.
Yeah.
How do you not know what that means? All right. The dwindling twilight, the fading heat waves, the finale of the night of. The summer is almost over, sports fans. After more than a week of ostensible outreach to African-American voters in front of mostly white audiences, Donald Trump's team announced this weekend that Trump will give an interview on Saturday to the African-American Christian TV channel Impact Network, and will also speak that day at an African-American church in Detroit, his first appearance before a mainly black audience. But this outreach comes against a bunch of other contrasting pieces of evidence and some problems for Donald Trump when it comes to race relations. On Saturday, the New York Times published a piece on a 1973 case against Trump and his father, Fred, in which the Justice Department investigated and ultimately sued Trump management for discriminating against black applicants for housing. And Exhibit B, the second piece of evidence, comes from Trump himself. On Saturday, this very Trumpian tweet after Dwayne Wade's cousin was shot. Quote, Dwayne Wade's cousin was just shot and killed walking her baby in Chicago. Just what I have been saying. African Americans will vote Trump! Exclamation point, and all caps, of course. Today, I'm joined by the legendary... Nobody says legendary here, apparently.
No.
We're not on Morning Joe.
Different venue.
Anyway, legendary Mike Barnacle. Mike, given Donald Trump's history, given everything that's happened in the course of this campaign, given that tweet, given all the rest of it, Trump's now going to go talk to African-American voters. Does he have any chance, in your view, of doing respectably well for a Republican in 2016 among African-American voters? Could he possibly get to like Mitt Romney levels of black vote support?
No, he can't get there because of his lack of familiarity among African-American voters in this country. The things that they are familiar with Donald Trump over, his appearances on TV, Celebrity Apprentice, stuff like that. That's one thing. The things that they are also familiar with Donald Trump, if they do take the time to become familiar with him, do not work to his favor. The fact that, you know, he's been talking about getting the black vote and appealing to African Americans in this country while standing before groups that look like the admissions committee for Augusta National, that is one thing. And the other thing is his tweets can be misread by people.
When Trump went out before largely white audiences and talked about black voters, sometimes in condescending ways, people in our business said, first thing you got to do is go talk to actual black audiences. So let's at least give him credit. He's now going to go actually talk to some African Americans. Good for him. The bigger problem, it seems to me, is the main thing that most African Americans know about Donald Trump is that he spent the early part of the Obama administration attacking Barack Obama as not an American, as an illegitimate president, which I think for most, certainly of the African Americans I know, and I bet for many, many, many of them across the country, has put Donald Trump out of reach, put them out of reach as votes for Donald Trump forever, because they regard that as a racist attack, and rightly so.
Well, that single act that Donald Trump originated, he wasn't the only one who originated, but he pursued it with a vehemence that was both cruel and stupid in retrospect. That's not going to go away.
He was the poster boy for birtherism.
The Trump campaign has a new nickname for Hillary Clinton, Hidin' Hillary. For 9 days, Trump's team has been sending daily emails to the press highlighting the running count of days since Clinton's last press conference while posing new questions to Clinton's team. Today, the 268th day, the Trump email included a question from Lieutenant General Michael Flynn about the Clinton Foundation. Clinton's team in Brooklyn has responded to calls for more press access by saying she has given more than 300 interviews, resulting in about 2,600 questions from the press in 2016. And while we're on the topic of the Clintons and the press, yesterday, Jim Ruttenberg of the New York Times wrote about Clinton's tendency to travel on a plane separate from the jet that holds her traveling press corps. Notable because since the 1960s, the press has traveled on the candidates' planes. Jim will be here to talk about his story soon, but before we get to that, there's been some disagreement on whether press conferences are a thing of the past in this digital age. So, John, do you think they still matter?
I do, and look, there's a ton of people who say, look, you know, The only reason you care about this is because you're in the press. The press is going to preen in front of the cameras, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those things are largely true. There's some element of that. We have grandstanding reporters in our midst all the time. One of them sitting right here.
Where?
Sorry, right behind you over there. But the reality is that Hillary Clinton's, the people who know her campaign best are the people who cover it on a day-to-day basis. And to put her in a situation where she has to address those people with some regularity and where she doesn't have any controls or constraints over the interview, it's a different thing than doing a one-on-one interview where the time is constrained and other constraints are placed on the interviews. It's a free-flowing thing where she's questioned by the people who know her best. She should do them. Both candidates should do them regularly, always, as presidents should.
Oddly enough, I agree with you almost completely. And I think the principal reason for a press conference at this stage has little to do with the home server or even the Clinton Global Initiative. It is this, that if you're sitting at home tonight watching this program and you have a son or a daughter, 15, 16, and 17 years of age, you want to know from the potential president of the United States, odds-on Hillary Clinton, what are you going to do about Syria, about Aleppo? What are you going to do about the introduction of United States military forces in and around the globe, about these hot-button situations? You want to know that because you want to know what's going to happen.
And it's the case that, you know, and the logical extension of that is that even though she's done all these interviews, she hasn't been asked those questions very often.
Right.
And there's a better chance she's going to get those questions if, in fact, she meets the press. All right, on Sunday night, Donald Trump called on Clinton to release her health records, tweeting, quote, "I think both candidates, Crooked Hillary and myself, should release detailed medical records. I have no problem doing so!" Exclamation point. Hillary, question mark? The Clinton campaign responded by saying that Clinton has already released more medical information than Donald Trump's campaign, and that his only documentation of health has been an adjective-addled letter from his personal physician. The Clinton campaign questioned the credibility of the doctor who wrote Donald Trump's famous clean bill of health. And if you've been wondering why, take a listen to how that doctor described to NBC on Friday how he wrote that letter, a process that took him all of 5 minutes.
I thought about it all day, and at the end, I get rushed and I get anxious when I get rushed, so I try to get 4 or 5 lines done as fast as possible that they would be happy. In the rush, I think some of those words didn't come out exactly the way they were meant. His health is excellent, particularly his mental health. He thinks he's the best, so it works out just fine.
All right, so there's a lot of arguments about transparency going on here in the campaign, but on this question of health, Trump's apparently trying to go on offense against Clinton. Clinton's fighting back. Who's got the upper hand in that argument?
Are you kidding me? I mean, we just saw Willie Nelson posing as a doctor.
That's like Willie Nelson plus the dude
John,
from the Big Lebowski.
I have to tell you, I do my own grocery shopping. I meet a lot of ordinary people during the course of the week. This campaign is scary enough without pondering about further health statements. We ought to have health statements from both candidates. We ought to know their physical health. Their mental health, that's another thing that's on exhibit every single day. And so far, boy, I don't know, Donald's losing. I really find it baffling that Trump has decided to try to make this issue for a couple of reasons. One is that, you know, Hillary Clinton could turn around and basically say, you know, I'm happy to release my health records if you're willing to release your taxes, which is another issue I know you and I agree on. It's ridiculous, insane, and totally irresponsible and outrageous that Trump has not yet released his tax returns as every other major party candidate has for years going back. But it is true what the Clinton campaign says. She has released more, not enough, but more health information than he has. And this guy, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, the idea that was that a real doctor?
This gastroenterologist, or whoever this guy is, who is standing as Trump's, apparently pretending to be his internist, is the health authority on Donald Trump. He will be, by the way, according to that man, the healthiest president ever to enter office, ever.
It's no wonder,
including ones that were like 40 years, 30 years younger.
It's no wonder that I also agree with your instinct, having just seen that doctor and this discussion, that turnout is odds on to be low.
It has become kind of this back and forth has become ludicrous, even for late summer, even for this period. The idea that we're having this discussion is kind of crazy. What do you think of that doctor? Would you let that guy treat you?
Oh, he's been my PIP, my personal physician for many, many years now. Look at me. I'm the picture of health, greatest health ever. Today, Hillary Clinton's longtime aide, Huma Abedin, announced that she's separating from Anthony Weiner after the New York Post published another one of Weiner's graphic exchanges on Twitter. Abedin and Weiner have been married for 6 years. Now, normally, the dissolution of a marriage wouldn't warrant our attention on this show. But today, Donald Trump made it political by applauding Aberdeen in a statement and then calling into question Clinton's judgment for ever allowing Weiner, quote, such close proximity to highly classified information, unquote. John, Trump is trying to work this into the news and into his favor. Does this have any political significance whatsoever?
No.
I agree.
It has no political significance whatsoever. The dissolution of marriage is a sad thing. You know, but in terms of whether this is going to matter to anybody out there in America who's deciding who the next president should be, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. And this is really all we probably should say about the thing on the show right now.
Move on.
Okay, coming up. Everything Colin Kaepernick related. Thank God we have Will Leach to help us out with that. Stay tuned.